Good day. My name is Philip Edwards, also known as Maang. This is a statement of my personal bias and my background for the purpose of evaluating subsequent video segments on Indigenous issues. First of all, I'd like to say I'm from the Lake Nipigon region, the White Sand Band primarily. The White Sand First Nation is located 250 kilometers north of Thunder Bay in the Armstrong area. I was born in that vicinity to traditional people. My mother's generation grew up as people hunting, fishing, and trapping and speaking the native language, and were also survivors of the residential school program. I myself am a survivor of the 60s SCOOP program, where children were apprehended from their families and adopted out or put into non-native foster homes. My situation is a little unique, and I will get into that at another time in another video segment. I grew up in southwestern Ontario as a result of that, in a rural farming community where I did a lot of farm labor as a young man. At the same time, I was unsuccessfully assimilated into non-native culture. I resisted a lot of things and eventually set out on my own and didn't go back to my native community until I was 25. So that's about it. My purpose in preparing this video is as a background to talking about Indigenous issues in a more comprehensive way, rather than in a three-point political solution way. I think we need a more comprehensive approach to dealing with problems. I was educated for 2 years at the University of Windsor, where I studied philosophy and linguistics, later finishing a BA from Lakehead University in social sciences, where I was trained in social science research methods and went on to conduct research in education, family violence, and community issues in the Thunder Bay region. So over a period of 20 years or so, I was actively involved in Native issues, community development all across Canada, at least from Windsor, Thunder Bay, and Vancouver. I consider myself to be a linguist and a social scientist, but my research I like to call action research, in that it should lead to some substantial change rather than simply used for a discussion and to write a report about. So that's what I hope to achieve. My Windsor activities in the early 80s were centered primarily on the Friendship Center movement. So I was involved with the Friendship Center there for several years in many different capacities. In Thunder Bay, I was somewhat of a community media personality, writing controversial things on Native issues for the Chronicle Journal, and being a subject of the media as a Thunder Bay Police Services Board governor at that time as well. I did a lot of community research there in the Thunder Bay area on education and family violence and related matters. The perspective, the angle on my research and presentation is going to be primarily on the cultural viewpoint. because I think this is something that is often overlooked. Culture is often dismissed as an important factor in social programs, political issues, so on and so forth. So I'd like to draw attention to that. I'm a world traveler. I maintain an interest in world events. I lived in Korea for 11 years, Saudi Arabia for 3 years, and traveled around the world. I would say that I am a critic of corporatized imperialism, and I see this as a main factor undermining indigenous interests all over the world. So I will get into that. I have some background in religious studies, and I have been examining, the politics and the institutional cultures of various institutions all over the world. I'm of mixed ancestry, but I would consider myself to be balanced and pro-Indigenous and counter-Eurogenal in the sense that Canadian society is a product of the European Aboriginals, and I call them Eurogenals rather than white people, because it's not an issue of skin color or race. It's primarily an issue of culture, and we need to get into that. So my perspective is going to be somewhere between First Nations and off-reserve, because they're not entirely the same, and that needs to be pointed out. I'm also counter-process in that society has developed this way of dealing with people that is simply process. And I think that process in itself must be challenged. So I call that counter-process. I'm in favor of the re-empowerment of Indigenous people, and that needs to be discussed, because I'm not saying that everything should just be handed over to Native people. I think we must gradually reassume our ownership and responsibility for our lands and resources and issues. I currently maintain an interest in Indigenous issues and world events. I'm promoting Anishnaabek, that is Ojibwe language. I developed a script for representing Algonquin-type dialects for the Great Lakes region, using a single script to represent many dialects, if not all dialects or all languages in the Algonquin language family. So I hope to present that topic and find out how useful it might actually be. My focus of interest these days is in linguistics. I consider myself to be a designer and developer in that I believe things should be reevaluated, and I am constantly developing and designing new approaches to things, whether they be in language or in technology. I have a 2-year diploma in robotics or electromechanical engineering from Algonquin College here in Ottawa. So I hope to put that to good use as well. So there you have some overview of my background and my bias and how it might affect my presentation and my research. So I hope that gives you some idea of what it is I'm talking about. Thank you.